And just as we're saying as a mantra with COVID that none of us are safe until all of us are safe, and don't we see that in our own country? This disease has been allowed to run away and enter the most marginalized communities of people, and that impacts on all of us. Well, the same is true globally. If the disease is running away unmitigated because poor countries can't get access to the vaccine, we run the risk of more challenging variants like the Delta one, and you can envisage that there could be more transmissible, more deadly vaccines than Delta, which also begin to challenge the vaccinations that people have had. So I think it's critical for the donor countries to see the bigger picture, to see that this really is a time, not to be cutting, heavens no, but to be stepping up to support all countries to come through this, because we're going to have a pretty mean little life in our bubbles if we let the world outside the high-income countries just continue to have to wallow in the misery of this. Look, it's disgraceful that still the level of vaccination in sub-Saharan Africa it would not have exceeded 4% at this point. So forget about your once in a lifetime holiday to the Okavango Delta or Mount Kilimanjaro. A lot of the world is going to be off limits the longer we act irresponsibly and not in solidarity with all countries recovering from this and coming out of the pandemic.
Does that mean there needs to be more money? Does it need to be more people? Do we need to be building factories so we can produce vaccines? How do we deal with that deficit in vaccines in the world, the need?
So all of the above. Now, I spent, I guess like many of us, just about full time on the pandemic since around March last year, but particularly from June with the World Health Organization request to chair the independent panel. And we produced a report in May, and we talked about the sort of medium to longer term changes to the global architecture and legal instruments and need for dedicated funding and so on. But we also talked about the immediate challenge of dealing with the pandemic. Firstly, we asked the WHO to set clear targets for ending it, which it had never done before, and has now produced, although the dates seem to be a bit rubbery and keep moving. We were told that we needed 70% vaccinated by the time the G7 met next year, which is June. That now seems to be sort of running on to September. And I have, by the way, seen WHO saying that because of the pathetic response with global solidarity to getting vaccination out there, the pandemic will run a year longer than it should, at least. So there is now a strategy for the 70% of every population to be vaccinated. But how to do it? Now, the really criminally negligent thing is that high-income countries have ordered at least twice as much vaccine as they need. And you don't need to keep the other half of it on store. You need to get it out there. It's got to be redistributed. Our panel said, having looked at the numbers, 1 billion doses could have been redistributed by September. Nothing like 1 billion was redistributed by September. It would have been hard-pressed to reach 100 million, frankly. And the G7 summit sort of talked the talk but didn't walk the talk. It talked about, yes, we pledged to give so many vaccines, but it's all pushed out. We need them now. Dr. Tedros's timetable said 10% of all populations to be vaccinated by September. Hasn't happened. There's such an unequal distribution of it. He said 40% by the end of the year. That's going to be a struggle. So we need that 1 billion spare doses that's available out there now and another 1 billion by mid-next year. And I've just put my name to another appeal that Gordon Brown has organised, going to the G20 leaders about that this week. So inequity of distribution is an issue. But then there's the inequitable production, that particularly the companies with the mRNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, they have hung on to the intellectual property for dear life, because this is mega bucks, right? These companies have never done so well as in the middle of a pandemic. And you do have to ask, whatever happened to the ethos of someone like Jonas Salk, who invented the Salk vaccine for polio, when he was asked, will I become a rich man from this? He said, good God, no. This is a gift to humanity. Well, far from mRNA vaccines being a gift to humanity, they're a gift to Pfizer and Moderna and their shareholders. All the more disgraceful because a lot of public money went into the development of these vaccines. And unfortunately, the governments that put the public money in didn't make it conditional on, certain things like get the production out there. So there is some movement with, for example, South Africa and I think Rwanda and Senegal being seen as new bases for production of the vaccines. But this takes time, right? This needed to be done, thought about when the vaccines were being developed last year, and they've been around since and being used since last December. Now, here's another issue. You have this sort of designed on the fly access to COVID tools accelerator called ACT-A for short, of which COVAX, the vaccine facility, is part. And it's been like a consortium of WHO, the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, TB and Malaria, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and also CEPI, which is a World Economic Forum initiated, a sort of private sector vaccine development body. It developed on a market model, and our panel said this is totally inappropriate when faced with a pandemic, that this whole tool needs to be redesigned to be fit for purpose because everything connected with fighting a pandemic is a global public good. We're all impacted by these goods not being very, very widely and affordably available. So that's got to be redesigned. So in essence, to get out of this, rich countries have to redistribute fast their surplus stock, which is got twice what they need. The vaccine manufacturing needs to get out fast. The companies have to be prepared to voluntarily license fast. Look, our panel supports the TRIPS waiver at WTO. And I would go so far as to say that I believe that whenever a pandemic is declared, the TRIPS rules should go out the window. You say we're going to fight this as a global community. But of course, there are countries, and particularly in Europe, who are fighting like crazy to stop this TRIPS waiver going anywhere. And that is reprehensible with what should be global public goods in the middle of a pandemic. So there's some quite deep problems here, and the longer people argue about how best to solve them, the longer we're going to be stuck with the pandemic.